Hello and welcome to Indian Standard Time. I'm Siddharth Varadarajan, and in this episode we will continue our post-mortem of the failed India-Pakistan talks. In the last interview that I conducted, I questioned Abdul Basit, the High Commissioner of Pakistan, on the Pakistani logic, Pakistani reasons for the talks having collapsed. In this episode, we will discuss the Indian position on why the talks never happened. Joining me in the studio, Ambassador Vivek Katju. Sir, you have had a long experience in dealing with Pakistan at the Ministry of External Affairs when you were at various important positions. I need to explain to you and to our viewers that even though you are an independent person and you do not represent the government, in the absence of people in government, External Affairs Minister or the NSA or the Foreign Secretary, being available for giving interviews on this subject, we will request you to perhaps don that hat or to use your insider knowledge of the way the system works and the Indian positions to help our viewers understand why the government of India said what it said and did what it did. I hope that's okay with you.
Well, I'll only underline, Siddharth, that I am an independent person and now I'm more or less like an analyst. So I'll try my best. I have a little understanding of how the system works, as you've said, but I'll try my best.
Very good. Ambassador Katju, one day before the talks were set to happen, there were these two dramatic press conferences, first by Sartaj Aziz, the Pakistani NSA in Islamabad, and then by Sushma Swaraj, the Indian External Affairs Minister in Delhi. And Sushma ji, in her press conference, there was a dramatic moment when she essentially laid out she reiterated 2 points. One, that it would not be acceptable for Pakistan to meet with and engage with the Hurriyat Conference. And secondly, that the ambit for the scheduled talks had to be focused on terror. There was no room to include other issues, such as Kashmir. She also said that to do so, to expand the ambit, would violate the spirit of the UFA agreement. This begs the question of why the two sides could have had such a differing interpretation of UFA. To your mind, is the charge correct that Pakistan moved the goalposts? In other words, having agreed to a certain set of initiatives at UFA, they changed their mind somewhere down the road and then presented India with a fait accompli of some kind? Or is it that India is misreading the UFA agreement?
No, I think the Indian position on the UFA agreement is valid. If you do a reading of the text of the UFA agreement, it makes it clear that there are certain preambular ideas, and then there is a concrete operational element which includes 3 specific meetings. Now, in the preambular portion, there is an agreement on a thought. And the thought which the two prime ministers have expressed is their common responsibility for peace and development and addressing outstanding issues. But there is no mention there of how this will take place.
Correct.
So it's only a thought that has been...
So it's not concretized in any way.
It has not been concretized. Now, clearly what the Indian side did was to propose a date for the meeting of the NSA talks. In this context, the Pakistanis had a problem, to my mind, in responding. Because on return from UFA, Nawaz Sharif faced a lot of flack. And that became evident from the press conference that Sartaj Aziz gave.
Which was two or three days after the UFA event.
Exactly. Right. Now, knowing Pakistan, I think the other Sharif, Rahil Sharif,
the
army chief, and his co-commanders were extremely upset at the profiling of terror. Because Pakistan, we must appreciate, has always been on the back foot on terror.
When you say profiling of terror, the fact that the first operative meeting in UFA is devoted entirely to
terror.
All issues connected to terrorism.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And whatever they may say, whatever allegations they may level against India, the fact is that the world over, Pakistan is today identified as the epicenter of terrorism. Now, they say that they are facing terrorism, and they are. But that terrorism is of their own making, and the international community understands that and recognizes that.
Right.
So, to my mind, the real difficulty they faced was on how to proceed with the UFA statement's operationalization without facing further criticism. And for this purpose, they started thinking that they would have to have attendant meetings or attendant issues along with the dialogue on terror between the NSAs.
Right. Now, let's take a step back.
Yes.
Surely Nawaz Sharif and Sartaj Aziz, as veterans of the Pakistani political system, would have realized the incendiary implications of the UFA statement, as it were. The reaction in Islamabad or in the rest of Pakistan should not have come as a surprise to them. So why is it that the Pakistani negotiators at UFA agreed to a statement which patently did not meet so-called Pakistani red lines in this fashion?
I suspect for two reasons.
Okay.
And this is purely as an analyst. One is that to their way of thinking, the words outstanding issues includes Jammu and Kashmir. And I recollect seeing your interview of the Pakistan High Commissioner, Basit, and he is making that point again and again in his...
That Kashmir was covered by this reference to outstanding issues.
And that Kashmir is the core issue, etc.
Right.
So that is one thing. And I suspect also that they thought that perhaps they'll be able to carry their domestic opinion and the army with them. But clearly in this, they had misread.
Right. But if your analysis is correct, and I would lean towards what you're saying as well, it would appear that there is a cleavage between the approach that Nawaz Sharif favors and the approach that the army might favor. And this is perhaps reflected also in the way in which the LOC, the ceasefire violations escalated in the run-up to the proposed NSA talks. Could this contradiction in approach between between the two Sharifs have been something that New Delhi could have tried to make something more of, had we played our cards differently?
You know, I think that we were very serious about the UFA statement. Sushma Swaraj, the External Affairs Minister, in her press conference said that the whole UFA meeting was at India's initiative. Now, that being so, there was naturally a desire in India to carry this forward. And therefore, perhaps there wasn't this focus entirely, though our media commented on it, and analysts here commented on it fairly vigorously, between the army and Sharif. And let's not forget that Sharif has gone through the experience of Kargil in stepping out of line on India. And therefore, he is extremely sensitive. So, he wants to do things, perhaps.
Right.
Though on Kashmir, I must say, Sharif is very, very strong. But otherwise, he wants to do things, he wants to normalize things, perhaps on trade and other fronts.
Right.
But he is diffident now to take on the army.
Right. Staying with this theme of how India might have played its cards differently, do you think that we ought to have drafted the UFA statement in a slightly different way, perhaps? Leave it a little bit more open-ended. The reason I'm saying that is because Mr. Modi's agreement with Nawaz Sharif on having a dialogue on terror was recognized, rightly so, as a big achievement, as an important development, because for the first time you're going to be having talks on terrorism. It was patently in our interest to make sure that those talks were held. Could we have found ways to, either in the drafting of UFA or subsequently, found ways to adopt shall we say, more broad-minded position or a less literal-minded reading of the statement so that the talks which were in our interest could have been held?
No, two things.
Yeah.
The first is that the UFA statement is by itself fairly clear on terror. And I think rightly so, because Indian public opinion on terror is strong.
Right.
And I think Mr. Modi's assessment is right that unless there is satisfaction on terror, which includes Mumbai, it will be extremely difficult to sustain a dialogue. And experience shows us that. The second is that if the Pakistanis were having problems, then they could have, they say that other things were discussed. That's what Basit told you, that other things were discussed on modalities, etc. of the dialogue process.
He says there was a more general understanding,
General understanding. Now, I don't think it's right to reveal understandings. What is revealed is the statement.
The text,
I don't think Basit was right in even revealing anything of that nature or speaking about it. But that apart, let us assume that there was some discussion on this. And if the Pakistanis wanted to take this forward, they were well within their rights to do so quietly through diplomatic channels. Basit could have been the conduit in India. He is the accredited agent, and Raghavan, our High Commissioner in Islamabad, could have done so.
Right.
In Islamabad.
Right.
So therefore, they need not have adopted this public attitude by getting their foreign secretary to be part of the delegation. What did that show? That only confirmed that as far as the Pakistan was concerned, they did not want exclusively a talk on terror.
Right. There was an interesting piece the other day by the former Indian National Security Advisor, M.K. Narayanan, analyzing the breakdown of the talks. And one of the points he made was that, I'll just quote from him, if I may. He says, it was extremely naive for India to have believed that there could be talks without Pakistan making Kashmir the centerpiece, even if it was not part of UFA, and that India should have anticipated this and resorted to flanking moves to ensure that talks did not get derailed as a result. As a diplomat, is this assessment correct? I mean, anybody who watches Pakistan could have guessed that they would want to raise Kashmir. And so anticipating that, were there moves that we could have taken? Flanking moves that Mr. Narayanan called.
Well, I wish he had elaborated on these flanking moves.
Right.
Once the UFA statement was out, and once there was a focus on terror, and rightly on the LOC and the IB in J&K, which the Pakistanis have really gone all out to create problems on, then what were the flanking moves possible? The UFA statement had to be operationalized. And once the UFA statement, which speaks for itself, has to be operationalized, then there is nothing possible.
But would the skies have fallen if, in the course of the NSA's meeting, let's say it had happened as scheduled on the 23rd and 24th, and after India and Pakistan had discussed the terror agenda, which is the main agenda, Sartaj Aziz had coughed and said, there's one other point. Can we discuss when it might be that we can pick up the threads on J&K? And Mr. Doval could have said, well, the atmosphere is not right. Perhaps if terror improves, the two prime ministers can... I mean, there are lots of ways in which that attempt to discuss J&K could have been parried at the talks itself. Were we right to then make it a deal breaker?
I think so.
Okay.
Because Doval didn't have that mandate.
Okay.
You see, Sartaj Aziz may be wearing other hats.
Right.
As far as Mr. Doval is concerned, he wears only the hat of the National Security Advisor. Now, what is the instruction which has been given to him by the Prime Minister?
Right.
And what is the instruction conveyed to the Prime Minister by the Prime Minister of Pakistan and jointly by them to the NSS?
Right.
That you will discuss terror and all aspects of terror.
Right.
No other instruction has been given to them. Why did if the Pakistanis had, as you say, said, okay, can we discuss modalities? Why would they have done it? Only because they wanted to go out and show to their public opinion that, look, we also discussed Jammu and Kashmir.
But would that have hurt India in any way, for them to assuage their public opinion? I mean, how does it doesn't alter things on the ground, does it? In Kashmir.
The Indian public opinion would have said that asked the government, why are you making this concession?
Right.
When UFA does,
so it would be politically something.
No, politically and diplomatically.
Yeah.
When the joint statement doesn't demand something,
Right.
then the matter ends there.
Right. Let me turn to the other red lines, so-called, or supposedly, or which is the issue of Pakistani meetings with the Hurriyat. Sushma ji was very clear at the press conference, and in a way she reiterated what the government of India had said last August, when the foreign secretary level talks were called off on the same issue. The Pakistanis say, I think Mr. Bassett in his interview to me, and I've heard it from other Pakistanis as well, say that there was confusion in their minds about the nature of this red line, and that at some point between the August message last year that you cannot beat the Hurriyat and what Sushma ji said in the press conference, there were confusing or contradictory suggestions. For example, that it's okay if you meet the Hurriyat at a reception, don't have a sit-down talk with them, and so on. Do you think, given that this was a deal-breaker last August, India ought to have flagged this up front with Nawaz Sharif at UFA, that look, we've agreed to this, this is a promising process that we're starting, please don't try to disrupt the process by meeting the Hurriyat? Would it have been wise on our part to have flagged this at UFA itself and been crystal clear from day one?
Siddharth, I think the step that Mr. Modi took last year and the government took on the Hurriyat was a correct step.
No, I'm not getting into the merits. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
First of all, let me say that, because I honestly feel that
right.
it was the correct step. And the signal sent out was fairly categorical. Now, I also, as an analyst, have felt, and I've written about this, that thereafter, the categoricalness which was there in the first decision was a little diffused.
Okay.
But that doesn't absolve the Pakistanis.
No, I think we're quite clear on that.
No,
but I'm just saying, if we had been firmer or clearer, yeah.
No. You see, in this, the onus lay on Pakistan.
Right.
They should have asked that, would you have a problem if we meet the Hurriyat in this fashion?
Right.
Would you have a problem with this? Because if you are coming as a guest, you must respect the sensitivity of the other side.
Right.
And if you've got to make a little effort to get that clarity, then that is fine. That should be done. So I don't think that the onus was on India in this case. The onus was on the guest.
Is it time for India to be less squeamish about raising issues of human rights violations in POK, Gilgit-Baltistan? I know that there are leaders and movements in Gilgit-Baltistan that are not happy with the arrangements the Pakistanis have made for them. There's a demand for Balwaristan and so on. Is it time for India to also have contacts, open a line of communication with all of these different players on the Pakistani side?
I think we'll have to cross a psychological barrier. The Indian establishment will have to cross that psychological barrier. But I do think that given our constitutional position on a J&K...
And the resolution of Parliament.
The resolution of Parliament follows the constitutional provision. Right. Given that, these are Indian nationals. Legally speaking, these are Indian nationals who are living under Pakistan's illegal and forcible occupation. There would be nothing wrong in our reaching out to them.
Right. Mr. Katju, we're coming to the end of our discussion, but I wanted to push things a little bit, have a forward-looking sort of end to this. We've seen now Prime Minister Narendra Modi walk the extra mile on 2 occasions. I think the invitation to Nawaz Sharif for his inaugural was a bold step. The decision to break the ice at UFA was a bold step. It's clear that Nawaz Sharif also showed a certain willingness to walk the extra mile. He took risks in coming for the inaugural and in agreeing to a statement which his military clearly did not like. Is there any scope, given what we've seen over the last 2 weeks, for the two leaders who have demonstrated a willingness to normalize in some way, for them to meet again or to pick up the threads? If so, how do you think this might happen, and what are the preparatory steps needed for that rapprochement to begin?
I think there is no parity between the Indian Prime Minister and the Pakistan Prime Minister with respect to their country, the respective countries' policies towards each other.
Right.
I've written that whenever the two Prime Ministers meet, there's always the unseen presence of the Pakistan Army Chief.
Right.
So, whatever Mr. Modi may try, at the end of the day, the Pakistani response will not be determined by Nawaz Sharif. And we've seen that. Right. Historically, we've seen that. Right. It will be determined in Rawalpindi and Pakistani.
But we still have no option but to keep talking to the civilians, right?
That of course so. Unless, of course, the army is actually holding the seat of power, which is unlikely at the moment because they are controlling things from behind the scenes.
Right.
So, that is the real issue. That what will the Pakistani army's response be? Now, the government in India and Mr. Modi, I think, has tried fairly substantively. But at the end of the day, the response is not determined by Mr. Nawaz Sharif. You take the trade issue, for example.
Right.
On the trade issue, who has stopped it?
Right.
The army.
It's clear that the road ahead is likely to be very rocky. The events of the past 2 weeks has not been very good for India and Pakistan, but here's hoping that at some stage the two countries are able to pick up the threads again. Thank you very much for joining us on Rajya Sabha TV this evening, Ambassador Katju. That brings to an end this episode of IST. Do join us again next week. Another guest, another topic. Thank you.